What's going on? My name is Caleb Spikestra. I'm a 3D designer, and I'm here posting videos every week as a way for me to continue growing and learning new techniques in 3D, and I'm hoping that you can come here and join me and learn along with me. Last week I worked on modeling a mechanical keyboard, and this week I'm going to be taking that mechanical keyboard and I'm going to be adding textures, materials, and we'll be doing a little bit of rendering in Octane. So without further ado, let's dive in. Alright, and we're back here in Cinema 4D, where we left off last week with the modeling of the mechanical keyboard. And I actually did a little bit of modifications on my own, and I actually came up with a smaller keyboard, just kind of for the fun of it, and also to speed up the process today. Just so that we're not having to UV unwrap a whole bunch of keys. It'll be a lot easier just to do a small thing, and you'll kind of get the idea just by doing this smaller keyboard. So this is what I've got, and I came in here, so my original one, we still had all of our different effectors, and we had all of our symmetry and things still applied. So I came into this one, and I basically flattened pretty much everything out. So as you can see, each row of keys is flattened down into the actual key, and then underneath that I have parented the key switch and then the base of that key, which we had modeled last week. So I have, each row separated out, and then I've got your bottom here, let me hide the ground. Yeah, so you got the bottom here with the legs, and I basically just kind of shrunk everything down and put it into a smaller keyboard here. Something that'll be easier for us to work with. So, we got our model. What is our first step here? First thing we're going to do is talk about the materials that I created. And as you can see down here, I've got my materials, which I pre-created because I put a decent amount of time into kind of figuring out what I wanted these materials to look like for the keyboard, and I would prefer not to go back and basically remake all of those. So I'll just kind of walk through the steps of the materials that I made. And this is actually my second take of this, and I already had a crash, an Octane crash. So in order to eliminate that possibility, I'm actually going to just pull up a picture of a render of the key, instead of having the live render running, just because I think that it's just too much on my computer trying to run OBS at the same time as trying to render. So this is what we'll have, and you'll be able to kind of see use this over here as a reference. And this is not the final material. This is before basically some of the changes that we'll make to add the details into each key, making the keys specific to each other, or to themselves. So let me go into my node material, and this is really honestly my first time messing around with node materials. So this is kind of what I've been trying to learn, and I'm pretty happy with what I was able to do with it. It's pretty cool what you can do with the node materials. It's a powerful tool. So if you have the ability to kind of get into working with the nodes and the mixed materials specifically, you can really do push your renders a lot further and kind of go for that photorealistic look. So, this is right here is my material, and there's quite a bit going on. It's really honestly not that bad, not that complicated. And I'll go through basically each thing as a step. So starting here, so I basically have my keycap material, and that's basically my base material. That's what you're seeing the majority of. And then I've got some mixed materials that this will be feeding into that are determining basically some sub layers and some things like what's underneath the scratches, things like so. So starting with just my base material, it's pretty straightforward. I have a roughness, a bump, and then round edges nodes. So for the roughness, I'll start there. I'm pretty much taking two separate textures here, and I'm feeding those into a mix texture. Whenever you're working in the nodes, you always want to create a texture projection and a transform node that feed into your textures. And the reason that we do this is just so that we can basically control the size of each individual texture, and we can also control the way that it's projected onto the cube. And that's actually going to be really important for our application, as I'll explain a little bit later. But for instance, with this one, so this I believe I'm using just a scratch material. There it is. I'm using, or sorry, this one's a fingerprint material. So as you can see on our render over here, we have sort of these fingerprint, kind of like greasy sort of look. If you look close at your keyboard, you probably have these on your keyboard. You can see little like finger indentations. And that's kind of what I was going for. So that was a pretty easy one. I just took basically a black and white fingerprint texture and applied that. And I just bumped the gamma up right here a little bit just so I could get a little more detail in there and make it a little more obvious what's happening. And then I'm multiplying that the ratio by 4, which means that it's going to be blown up quite a bit because with the initial size of the texture, the fingerprints just weren't the right size. And really, if you're going to have fingerprints on your key, it's going to be a full finger. So I had to scale that texture up quite a bit to make it work with the scale that we're working with. And then I'm just using a basic box projection, and I'm using that for pretty much all of my textures. So you'll see that repeated across almost every single texture I'm using. So these are feeding into this, which is being mixed into this this texture, which is a sort of a dirty, kind of like this like a swirly dirt type texture. And that just gives it a little more of that detail. And this is a much darker texture, so it's actually not going to show up quite as strong, but it'll give it a little bit of variety in the fingerprints, which is what I was looking for. Again, I bumped up the gamma a little bit to give it a little more detail. And once again, and yeah, I'm scaling it by 4, and I'm using a box projection. So these are both being mixed, and they're being mixed and fed into a gradient. And the reason I have this gradient, which this was actually a technique that I found from another YouTuber who was kind of going through his workflow with node materials. And with this, I basically wanted to feed it into the gradient so that you can control the highs and lows of your black and white textures. So this will be, if I bring the black in here, it's actually going to make all of those low points on the textures less strong. And if I bring the white in, it'll bring all the whites back. So it's going to you can basically make it less, either the indentions or the bump a little bit less strong by pulling these in. And it gives you just a little more control with your textures. So all of that is feeding into the roughness. Pretty simple, not much going on there. For our bump, and I guess I should explain. The roughness basically is determining the sheen on it. So if I have no roughness applied, it's going to be a perfectly smooth or a perfectly reflecting material. But with the roughness, it kind of like flattens out some of those reflections and puts like sort of the detail into the reflections. So then we've got this fed into the bump, and with the bump, I've kind of got 3 things going on, and I'll explain these individually. So the first one is just a simple noise. I'm using chips type. You can use whatever type of noise you want, but I liked the chips a lot. And I kind of messed around with these values until I got the right amount of noise that I was looking for. And I brought the scale of this noise way down to 0.3. And this, because you're using a noise, you actually, instead of using box projection, you want to use XYZ to UVW projection. Anytime you're using a noise, that's the projection type you will be using. And that's just the way that noises work in cinema. So we got these being applied to the noise. And then the noise is actually being multiplied by a float texture, which is kind of similar to our gradient. It's giving me just more control with the noise. So with the float texture, I can change this value here, and it will multiply it into here, and it will determine how dark or how light that noise is going to be. So I can kind of pull the noise back if I feel like it's too strong, or it's not strong enough. And you can see that kind of coming in. Let's see if I can zoom in here. Oh yeah. So the noise is basically causing that sort of cracked plasticky look. I don't really know what that is, and I honestly might have it too strong right now if you zoom way in. But it's kind of getting that texture of the plastic, that super detailed texture there, which I really like. I really like what that's looking like. And maybe it could be pulled back a little, but yeah. So that's how I'm getting that, is through the noise in the bump, and then with that noise, I have it being added to, once again, another texture. And this is a scratch texture, so it's just a bunch of little scratches. And that's kind of where you're getting these long scratches across the key. And again, this is actually being multiplied by 4. We've got a box projection, and it being multiplied into a float texture once again. Same thing up here. And I did that, so look at this, I pulled it way back. It's being multiplied by 0.08, which just makes it a really subtle scratch. And even still, it's coming through quite strong, but without that, it was a bit much. And that all depends on what texture you have. You may not even need the float texture to determine the strength based on how strong your texture is. So with these two, with the noise, with the scratches, they're being added together. And that's what's getting our overall scratches and sort of imperfections in the plastic. And then this is actually something that you're not seeing yet on here, because I haven't rendered it yet. So with this area here, I have this H, and that was kind of a test texture. I'm actually going to switch that out with my keyboard texture. So I'm actually going to go with kind of an interesting look. And I'm going to pull it up real quick. So you can kind of see the look that I'm going to be going for. So this is what I'm going for. I'm going with an Octane sort of. It's going to be like a specialized Octane keyboard. And just doing it for the fun of it. You can honestly put whatever icons you want on your keys, but this is just kind of my reference, so I can see where I want to put my icons on the keys. And this is going to be in place of putting letters or numbers or whatever is normally on your keyboard. So I'm just going to make a fun Octane keyboard. But this is the texture that I'm going to be putting in there. So that's what I'm putting in here, is those icons. And I'm going to explain how that will work. And that's going to be like towards the end of the material. But that's also being applied into the bump, and that will make it so that on each of our keys we'll have a little bit of bump where those icons are. Because if you notice on your keyboard, if you have kind of like the luminance coming through, it's usually sort of indented, like just a tiny little bit, like microscopically. So that's what this will give us. And for this, it's important that this is set to a UV mesh texture projection, because that will determine where the icons show up on which keys once we do our UV unwrapping. And I have this just set to 1s, which is exactly where we need it, because we want the entire thing to show up for our keys. And that's all being added, and I'm gonna go deeper into this. This might be a little confusing right now, but it'll make sense later. So this is being added into our scratch and into our noise. It's all being added and added again to go into the bump, which is determining sort of those imperfections in the plastic. And then the last thing I have on my keycap material is the rounded edges. And the rounded edges is just one node. And you can actually, I love, this is like one of my favorite features of Octane, but it kind of gives you that rounding without actually putting the beveling into the model. And it's just awesome because I don't have to create a ton of extra geometry for tiny little details of rounding edges. With this, I can just set 5 centimeters of radius for the rounding. I can choose how round I want it to be and then the amount of samples, and it creates that automatic like subtle rounding on the edges, making it feel less that like sort of cheesy 3D obvious straight edges, like really sharp edges. That nobody wants that in their renders. I don't know. Maybe you do. Maybe you do. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know you. Um, okay, so that's basically my keycap material. And the keycap material is being fed into a mixed material. So we'll have our keycap material, which is being mixed with this material. And this, as you can see, is super, super simple. It's just a diffuse material. A diffuse material that all I have running through it is just a color. And you could honestly add more detail to this. I don't think it's at all necessary because it's barely being seen in your material. But this is all you really need. So that makes that easy. What really is the way this is being driven is through the amount. And what this is doing, I'll explain what this is doing before I go into what the amount is it's determining where you see this keycap material that I had explained, and in this material, and where those show up. So if you look at our render here, you can actually see right on the edges, I have a little bit of these like scratches and this sort of red, orangish, what is that, like rust, I guess, rust material, rust texture, or rust colored material showing up through the plastic. And the idea is kind of like it's worn on the edges of the keys. You can see a little bit of that like underneath. The paint is like worn off, so you can see that underneath material. And it's sort of like a red. And that can be whatever color. It could be white. It could be even a darker black, which might be cool. Um, but yeah, so that is determining. This will be determining where where this material is showing up underneath our top material, and that's what this amount will be. So I'll explain the amount and how I'm getting that. Um, so for the amount, I have basically two textures here, and they're both kind of just these scratch textures that I have. And yeah, these are both being multiplied together. So it's similar to what we were doing before, where I have a scratch here and I have a more subtle scratch here. And these again are being box projected. They both are being box projected, and I didn't mess with the UVs at all. I guess I doubled this one. It all depends again on your specific textures that you're using. And then those are being multiplied. And then the multiplies are being added to a dirt node. The dirt node, this is the magic. This is the gold. This is my favorite part of Octane. Other than the rounding. I love the rounding. This is probably my second favorite. So the dirt node is basically is determining where things will be placed on the surface, and the dirt specifically chooses to put things on edges or in crevices. So I took my dirt node, and by inverting the normals, it actually is putting it on the edges of things rather than on the crevices. If you don't check this invert normal, it's going to put everything. It's going to put this amount all on the like where things come together, sort of like dirt would build up on in the corners of things. It'll be more of a corner dirt, but this causes it to be the outside edges. And with that, it's actually sweet. I can change the tolerance and in the radius here, and by messing with those sliders, it kind of determines how much shows up on the edges. So if we wanted to make this a really nasty like old keyboard, we could like really bring that up and have like a lot of scratches coming through. And by adding that into our textures, it's basically taking our textures and causing those textures to only actually apply on edges, which gives us this really sweet right on the edges sort of scratchy look. And then that is all being multiplied into this texture. And again, I'm trying to remember what I actually did with this texture. Uh, Yeah, okay, yeah, that's right. This is just kind of a just a noisy sort of texture. It's not like anything really that specific. Let me see what I call this one. Scratch. Yeah. This is just a really subtle one. So it's kind of this isn't even a necessary texture to have in there if you didn't want it. But I have these two scratches being applied to the dirt, and then I have this one, and this one because it's underneath the dirt node. This is actually applying across the entire thing. So the reason I added this guy in here was so that I could I want the majority of this red plastic showing up on the edges, but I want a little bit of it showing up on the faces of the key. So it's and I have a very subtle. It's being multiplied by 2, but it's a really subtle texture. Um, and that'll be so you'll have a little bit of that red sort of showing up on the top here and on the sides. Um, and that being added to this the dirt map texture sort of makes it more uniform across the key, makes those scratches and those like that little red texture red material showing up through across the whole thing, but the majority of it is on the edges. And that's all being fed into our mount of this mixed material. All right, that's through most of it. The last detail, which I took me a while to kind of figure out, and I had to sort of mess with things until I got it right, is the dust on the keys. So I was noticing when I was looking at my keys, most of the dust settles sort of on the edges of the keys, like underneath. And I mean, I can try and bring it up. It's going to be hard to tell, but the majority of it is going to be like right in like on the edges here and not as much on the tops of the keycaps. And the tops of the keycaps, you're touching them and stuff, so the dust is getting worn off of them, and you're not going to have any dust settling there. But it's all going to be settling sort of on those edges. And I really wanted to get that look because I think that that's important to having that organic, sort of realistic look to your keys. Um, so I actually was able to figure that out with a lot of just kind of tweaking. But as you can see again in our render here, I have these dusties and all this like little lint and hairs and stuff, and it's only being applied to the edges of the keys, not on top. There's none of that on top, which is exactly what I wanted. Um, and the way that we did that was similar to our dirt map. I'm using another, so I'm taking this mixed material and applying it to another mixed material, which that is being mixed with my dust material. And again, this is a super simple material. It's just a diffuse material with a pure white diffuse. Nothing else going on here. It's just a diffuse material, and the diffuse material is being mixed with this amount. Um, and instead of using my dirt, because the dirt's just going to give me sort of either the edges or the indentions, this is actually I can put a fall off map. And the fall off map allows me to determine where things are being placed. So I can say I only want this texture to be placed on the side, on like one side of my model, or maybe I want it to be placed on just the sides, but not the top and the bottom. Um, and the way I did this, which honestly I might have done this wrong, but I got the result I wanted in the end, was I took this texture, which I believe this is my my dust texture. Yeah, this is my dust texture. I transformed it by 4, so I scaled it way up because it was just small. I needed it to be scaled up so I can get some of those hairs and stuff in there. And it's box projected, and then that's being multiplied by my fall off map. And this is similar, like I said, similar to the dirt map. In the fall off map, because I set it to 90 degrees, normal versus vector, 90 degrees, that is determining it. It basically is projecting onto 90 degrees, so like on the side. And then I had to change my minimum value. Actually, I had to reverse these because it was doing the opposite of what I wanted. It was only applying to the tops and bottoms and not to the sides. So by reversing these and putting the minimum value as 1 and the maximum as 0, it reversed it. So I ended up with the texture only being applied to the sides. And then that fall off direction needs to be 1 in this area. And honestly, I kind of just moved these numbers around until I got what I wanted. So I personally don't totally understand how these work, but if you kind of mess around with the values, eventually you can kind of get what you're looking for. And that's being multiplied. So this texture is being multiplied by this, which is basically forcing that this texture to only be applied to the sides of the key, and that's being added in to a noise, just because I wanted to get a little more dusty in there, because with just this dust texture it wasn't quite enough. So I took my noise um, and projected that, and again using the XYZ to UVW, projecting the noise, which is being added with a Falloff map, and it's using basically the same exact Falloff map. I just changed the value of the Falloff skew factor, um, which kind of just makes it a little more subtle or a little stronger in how it's projecting. And by taking that and taking this one, which is multiplied, and adding them together, I ended up with my amount, which is causing it to only apply to those sides. And yeah, so we get that dust coming through. And then finally, we have what's actually not showing in this render, the luminance. And as you can see with my keys, I have their backlit, and it's coming through where the keys actually show up, the key letters, and that is actually going into. So I have my keycap mix material, which is being applied to my third mix underneath, and then I have this luminant material being applied on top of that. And it's pretty subtle right now. And this is just a diffuse material with a black body emission being fed into it. And the black body emission is being determined by an RGB spectrum, so I can choose sort of the exact color of it. And I could honestly even animate these values, so we can have like maybe it's a keyboard where it's like shifting colors going through the spectrum. So you got like this value changing, whatever that would look like. And that's being fed into this black body emission, and I bumped the power up, kind of got it where I wanted. And I changed the diffuse to just straight black, so I'm not getting any diffuse. It's only being emissive. And we might honestly be able to get a little bit of a little something out of this. Yeah, I'd have to kind of mess around with those values. But yeah, that's being fed into there, which is giving us this luminance. And we're determining where the luminance will show up through the key by our image texture. And once again, this was my test texture. So I'm actually going to switch that out for my new Octane icon texture that I created. Which is just using those Octane icons. And the biggest thing, most important thing, so we don't end up with weird issues of where the luminance is popping through the keys, is making sure that this is mesh UV projection. And once we UV unwrap our keys, we will determine which icon shows up on each key based on the projection, the UV projection. And that is being applied, and I actually had to invert this. I believe I'm having to invert this just because I should have actually done a black background with white icons. But because I did it this way, I just have an invert thing, which caused it to create the right amount, giving us our final material for the keys. Now, that's a lot for the material, but I really think that it gives you such a sweet look, and it's definitely worth it. And once we create materials for the rest of the keyboard, I'm actually going to be able to apply the same material and kind of just change some values up, and we can sort of get a similar look without doing a lot of extra work. So there's that. Let's see. I'm gonna close out of this, and we'll close out of the render for now. And again, I tried doing rendering with my OBS running, and it just kept crashing. So I'll probably do the rendering and then show the final results later of what we ended up with through it. But I'll explain how I get to the point that I got. And yeah, let's keep this going. Okay, so we got our keyboard, we got our material set up. What do we need now? We need to, well, first we need to apply our material across our keys. So I'm gonna just drop it on top because all the keys are gonna be using the same material, which that's the best part. The best part of it. And now you see what's going on. Look at this. This is crazy. We're getting some weird stuff. It's because we're not unwrapped yet. So we're gonna have to go through and unwrap all of these keys. Again, there might be a better way to do this, but this is kind of the way that I've been doing it. So yeah, let's I'll go into my first key here, and I'm gonna go into my BP UV edit mode. And pull this guy over. This is another thing. I'm in Cinema R20 or S22 rather, and before unwrapping in Cinema was a nightmare. It was horrible. I actually used a separate software called UV Edit. Is by Hedis. Really great software. But it cost a lot of money, and it was another thing. You had to basically export your model, unwrap it, bring it back into Cinema. It was just a whole nother step, a lot of extra work. But Cinema has recently updated their UV unwrapping and made it actually very user friendly. It works well with Cinema and makes everyone's lives better. We all have a better life now. It's just way better. So I'm gonna take my key, and this is flattened out from before, from last week. We were still using, I believe, sweeps, or we were using rather lofts for our keys. But now I've actually flattened it all out, so it's just the geometry, and I actually upped the edges, the edge loops here, so we have a little more rounding on the edges of our keys. There. Um, all right, so let's see if I can remember this. So I want to select the key that I'm going to unwrap, go into edge mode or into face mode rather. I hit Command A to select all faces. And then we're going to go into the automatic UV, and this is awesome. The fact that we're doing something that is sort of geometric and is not super organic means that we can actually use a lot of these automatic UV projecting tools, which just makes our lives so much easier. And I'm going to go with cubic and just hit apply. And look at that. It just applies it. It unwraps it. Now it's still not exactly where we want it, because as you can see, we're still getting like these icons spread out all over here. And the way I can figure out exactly where I want to place these UVs, is by going into, or rather, I have to open a texture first. So I'll open the texture that's being applied, which is our icon, Octane icons 01 that I created. And now we can see where that's actually being applied to the key. So really all that matters here is the top face, this face right here of our key. The rest of this really doesn't matter because all that's being applied with our material is it's only this texture is being UV'd onto it. Everything else is being box projected. So all that matters is that that luminance channel is what is being applied to this texture, is being unwrapped. So I'm going to rotate this because I'm going to want it at 90 degrees or close, and then move it. So yeah, it's using the same exact thing. So R to rotate inside of here, and I can select any faces out here and it will select it in here as well, which is awesome. And then I can hit E to move. Let's actually grab all these guys because I don't want these to be in our way. Make sure I got them all. And then E, I'm gonna move that out of the way. Grab this one. Bring it in here. So I'm gonna apply. I kind of set these icons out the way I want them to be applied to the keys. So we got our first key, which is going to use that space bar, and I'm just saying with our little keypad that we have set up here, the space bar is how you render because that's fun. Like whenever you hit render, you just slam that space bar. Makes it a lot more fun to render. If rendering wasn't fun enough already, which we all know, we love doing some renders. Oh, Didn't want that. And then I'm hitting T to scale and just scaling that up to where I want it. Somewhere in here. Keep rotating. It's looking good. It's looking pretty good. I want it to be centered. I'm honestly probably going to scale past a little bit. Yeah, I like that right there. Look at that. So that's where that glowing, the underglow is sort of going to come through on the top of the key there, which I like that. And again, you can kind of see it coming through here. With our final material, that shouldn't matter. That won't actually come through because this will only be applied to the top of the key. All right, and that's all I need for this one. The rest of this projection isn't really that important. So let's go on to our next row of keys. And I'm going to kind of go through this. If I hit texture, I can actually find my texture so I don't have to reload it every time. Hit Command A to select all the faces and apply the cubic unwrapping. Just select this top, and I want this top to be applied to the camera, create camera icon. Rotate all the way around here. And probably scale that down a little bit. Not quite the size I want it. Oh, and yeah, so you also have to be aware of what orientation. So this is upside down, so I need to actually rotate this. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I think I can just go in here and change that to 180, hit enter. Yeah, and that automatically applies. Oh, hold up. Nope, it didn't. It actually rotated the geometry. Not what I want. Yeah, there's probably a faster way to do this. I'm sure there is. Oh, and again, I'll make sure I'm just selecting that top. Rotate it all the way around. 180. Coming around. Beautiful. Make sure it's centered up on the key. And I'm probably going to scale it down a little bit because I want a bigger icon on there. Pretty close. This isn't perfect. I'm kind of eyeballing, honestly. If you really wanted to, you could measure this out a lot better than I am. But I'm just trying to get something in here for now. I might come back through and make sure everything is centered nice and the right size. 'Cause you want your icons to be like uniform. So right now our Octane logo there is actually a lot bigger than the camera. But maybe I want that. Maybe I want that to be the most prominent key on my keyboard. And the fun part too is you can put whatever icons you want in here. So if you wanted to make a special keyboard just for whatever game you're into, like maybe you want a Fortnite keyboard, you can do that. You can add whatever icons you want to these keyboards and kind of make like a fun, like specific keyboard as if this was a product that you could buy specifically for someone playing that game or using that software. Yeah. Fun stuff. Fun stuff. All right. Same thing. Apply a cubic mapping. I want to be able to see my texture again. And grab the top face here. And this is going to go on my target light. So just try and center that up as best I can. And actually want it to be a little bigger. I think that's pretty close to the same size as that camera. Pretty centered. There we go. Next key. I'm hitting Command A to select all the faces, applying a cubic mapping to it, and then we'll open the texture tab, bring up our texture, grab that one face, and this one's going to be for the sun, or what is that? That's the planetary daylight or something. I don't actually use that light in Octane very often. Center that up. Scale, scale, scale. Cool. I am happy it's a rainy day today, so I can just sit inside and work on this, and I don't have to worry about missing out on the beautiful weather. we've had a lot of rainy days recently here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Okay, I'm actually missing an icon. Oh wait, no, I'm an idiot. I need to move over. There it is. It's off my screen. Okay. There. Oh, yeah. See this? It's rotated totally the wrong way. I can actually rotate either way here. So I'll rotate this around. If anyone knows a faster way to do these rotations, like being able to apply the value, let me know, because this is kind of a pain and you don't get a perfect rotation. I'm sure, and again, I'm sure it exists. I just didn't look into it at all. Bring that down. Oh, look at that. Beautiful. Right in the center there. That's going to be a cool one. Okay, so we got that whole row. We got our fifth row and fourth row completed. Now I'm going to go into my third row. Repeat the process. Do a cubic unwrapping here. And let me find that key. There it is. Let's view our texture. Another really cool thing you can do with this is you can actually do a UV map, and it applies it onto keys, so you can see how using this UV texture, you can actually see how it's being applied, which is a pretty sweet. I really like that they added that feature because I used to have to create a UV texture and then bring it in and do that whole thing, and this just makes it a lot easier because it's built into it. Um, and I believe there was something else I had discovered that was pretty awesome. Um, I think it was under configure here. Yeah, I've already got this up actually. You can, yeah, you can change the opacity of it too, which is kind of awesome. So it shows you the opacity. So if you want just a little bit of that UV coming through, but you still want to see what you're working with, so you can still see your texture, you can actually bring the UV down quite a bit, and applies it to both of these, both your live or your picture viewer and your UV texture editor. And I can choose the opacity of that, which is kind of awesome. But for now, we're going to stick with our texture because really that UV doesn't matter quite as much. All right, so this key is going to be my path tracing. So I kind of have these two keys here, which I thought would be kind of fun, where you can determine if it's going to be a path tracing, if the render will be path tracing or direct lighting, which is just kind of a fun way to switch between them. And then I was thinking I have these two, man, this is rotating slow. Rotate, rotate. Almost there. Oh, it's actually better if I go on the corner. And then I have these arrows, and my thought process there was you could use those arrows to kind of switch between your different render modes. You could go into like all the different render modes that Octane has, which is kind of fun. All right, center that up. Boom, done. Command A, apply cubic. Go into the texture, add that texture, move it up. This is going to be my first arrow here, and it's pointing up right now. I want it to be pointing left. Man, this rotation thing is a pain. I'll look into it, and if I can figure it out, I'll probably add it to the end of my video, how you actually rotate this stuff more efficiently than I'm doing it right now. But I don't want to go looking things up right now. Or rotate the UVs rather. Okay, I'm going to center that up, make sure it's the size I want it. I'm liking that size right there. That's looking pretty good. Pretty tasty. Yum, yum, yum. Okay. I'm going a little crazy here. Select that, Command A, apply cubic, grab just the face we want, open that texture up, and this will be our other arrow, which needs to be rotated this way. Rotate, rotate, rotate. It's got to be a faster way to do this. Let me know. Let me know if someone knows a much quicker way. That way I don't have to do the research myself. Center that up as close as I can. Pretty close. Oh, that's pretty good. Let me bring it up a little. Yeah. Oh yeah. Sick. Fourth key here. Day. Apply unpacking. Open that texture. I wonder if the bigger it is, the faster. No, never mind. Am I doing this the right way? Yeah. Okay, rotate. Right where I want it. So yeah, it's going to be just a lot of lining up your keys. This is why, as you can see, I didn't want to do an entire keyboard, because this will take me a lot less time doing just, what do I have here? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, yeah. 18 keys, right? Yeah. 18 keys. It's a lot faster than an entire keyboard. Just much faster. And I'm here to learn not to do busy work. Cool. At least as little busy work as possible. Okay. I'm going to finish up the rest of these keys. I'm probably going to skip through this for the final cut of the video, but you get the idea of the UV unwrapping, and after I finish doing all these, then we'll come back in and we will finish up our, we'll do some renders, and I'll probably create a new material for the base of the keyboard, and then we'll have our final product. All right, and now we have everything unwrapped. I just went through and unwrapped every single key, so you can see now all of our keys are mapped to the correct spot on the UV map. So now that that's done, there is something that I forgot that I actually need to go back and make sure I do. So I'm going to go back into my startup layout, and open my material and open this node editor. And I already added this in, but this is important. So with our image texture before, I just had the image texture with the invert going directly into the amount to get our luminant keys kind of shining through the keycap material. But what I forgot is that we needed a fall-off map, similar to what we did with our dust, where we were basically causing none of the dust to spawn on the top of our keys, only on the sides. We have to do the same thing for this, otherwise the way that we unwrapped our keys will end up getting some of that texture showing through on the sides of the key. So I used a fall-off map, and I just kind of reversed it from what we had with our dust fall-off map. So we have 1 on the minimum value, 0 on the maximum value, and then the vector is 90 degrees, and that is being multiplied by the inverted image texture that we have here, and that's going into our amount, which is basically making it so that only those icons are going to show up on the top of our keys, and that's it, not on the sides. And then I had to go over as well and do that way back at the beginning here in our bump. We added the same thing. We added the same texture, and I had to make sure I had that same fall off being multiplied in there so that we would have that same thing being fixed there, so we don't end up seeing like the bump applied on the sides of our keys. So now that our keys are complete, I think it's time to create a material for the base of our keyboard. So these are all done. We basically will have this cord, and I think that will just be a pretty simple material. I'll probably just apply a sort of diffuse rubbery material. I don't even know if we'll need textures for that. But for the base of our keyboard, I want to apply a similar material to the one that I'm using on the keys, but I want to remove some stuff, and I also want to change how the dust is laying down and maybe make the edges a little more scratched up than our keys are scratched up. So for this, I'm actually going to take all of my materials here and hope we don't crash. And I'm going to duplicate them over. So we'll have some extras here. And my naming for these materials is not great. And I will probably go back and fix all this, but I'm not going to do it now for this video. You can do it in your project. So we're going to take our new duplicated material here. And I will make sure I know which one I'm working with here. So this is going to be keyboard base material, and then I'll make sure this one is key. So I know these are the two I'm working with mostly. And this one I'm going to apply to the base of my keyboard. And let's go back in our node editor, and there's a few changes we'll want to make here. And pull this up. Alright, there we go. Okay. So first thing we're going to want to do is actually remove our emission here. We don't need any of this because there will not be any of that backlit part of the key coming through. So we don't even need to worry about that. And I can actually go all the way back, and I don't even need this mixed material anymore. Yeah, so I'm just making sure that that's right. So we'll delete all of that, and we're coming all the way back to our master key material. So that means that we can actually hide, or we can actually use just purely this material right here for our base. So I'm going to rename that one as base mat. We got our key mat or base mat, and this is the one that we're actually going to want to edit here. And the biggest thing we're going to want to do is we're actually going to, I misspelled this here, just noticed that, dust, not dist. We're actually going to want to change the way that the dust is being applied, because if you notice on your keyboard, you're not going to want the dust applied to the edges of the base, you're going to want it flat on the base, because the dust will end up getting kind of in between those keys. So I'm going to change my Falloff Map here, and I want to change it in a way that it is now being applied to the base rather than the sides. So for this, I'm going to do the same thing that I did before, and I can actually copy. Yeah, let me actually do this. This will make it a lot easier. I'm going to go back into my master key here. Oops. So I'm going to open my node editor, come in here, and we're going to grab this Falloff Map, because this is the Falloff Map that's only being applied to the top of the keycaps, and we're going to want the same thing to happen with the base of our keyboard. So I'm going to pull those, copy them, and we're going to go back into our base material here. In the node editor, pull that up. And we're going to switch it out for these Falloff maps. So let me paste this. Oh, and you can actually not copy across. So that's something I didn't realize. Here, I'm going to have to actually copy it over, or take the values to make sure I'm getting the correct values here. So we got base material, go into my master. Actually, I'm going to go into the key material. So I want to make sure I'm at 90 degrees, 1 on the minimum and 0, 1 on the minimum, 0 on the maximum value. So in our base material, open the node editor, and we've got 1, 0, and in this fall-off skew, if you noticed, I put as low as I possibly could, and that way, it's actually only, that way with the really low fall-off map, we're actually not getting any of that side stuff, because the fall-off isn't allowing it to go on any angles. So that needs to be set as low as possible. And that should do what we want it to. So now our dust will only be applied to the top of the material. It won't be applied to any of the sides, which is actually perfect for our application. And the last thing I want to do with this material is I actually want to, well, first remove this guy because we don't actually need this texture anymore. And that can be removed, and we can also remove this add so that this will go directly into that bump. And the other thing I wanted to do was I really wanted to change the value of the scrapes that we have. So the edges of our keyboard base are going to be a little more scraped up than the rest of it. So in here, I'm going to change my dirt map. And in here, you're basically going to want to mess with the strength value, and you're going to want to mess with the radius and the tolerance, and kind of moving those values around. We can get that dirt map to show up a little bit more on the edges, and it will give us more of that sort of chipping effect on the edges of our keyboard. And I've kind of looked through this, and I kind of know the values that I'm looking for. So I definitely want to bring this radius up to around 40. And I'm going to bring the tolerance a little higher. And well, actually, I think I want to bring it down because I want there to be less tolerance, but I want it to be bigger. And we've got 10 on the strength. I think that was good. And the distribution, I believe I'm going to pull up a little bit as well, just to space everything out because we're working with a bigger surface. So that's kind of the values that I want for this, and a lot of it is just kind of using the live render and messing with those values and getting it to a point that you want it to be. All right, so we can close out of this, and that's being applied here. We don't have to UV unwrap the keyboard base because we're using all box projection on that. We're not actually using any of the UVs to determine how the material is laying down. The last thing I want to add is I want to add a material to this chord here, and this is going to be just a super simple material. I'm going to create a new Octane material, and I'll apply that to the chord. And inside this, I'm going to go with a flat black, maybe not full black. One of the things I've learned is that you never want to go with either full black or full white when you're using colors. Typically, sometimes you will for artistic production, but typically you want to go with an off color just because nothing in the real world is completely black or completely white. So you want to go with more of an off color. So this will be my diffuse color, and I will actually use a glossy material here, but I'm going to bring my roughness, the float value on the roughness, way up here. And notice I'm not even using the nodes here. You could go into the nodes and do all of this yourself, but I believe that because it's just going to be a simple material, I'm not even going to get in there and waste time with that. So I'm going to pull this way up here to around, yeah, 0.4, 0.5, somewhere in there. And my specular value is all right. And I could even maybe add a little bit of maybe I don't know, bump to this. Let's throw in a image texture in here. Come down here, find my image texture. This is why you don't use this typically, is because you end up spending all your time just looking for what you're trying to find. There we go, image texture. And inside my image texture, I'm going to probably just pull in one of those scratch maps that I used earlier. I think I like this one. It's a little bit of scuffing. And I think that'll give it just a little bit of that kind of detail, but it's a rubber. It's not going to be scratched up too much. So I think that should be good for our application. And for this, because I do not have it UV'd, I'm going to go to a cubic projection, just so that that's being applied in a way that will make sense. And the reason that I've kept this, I haven't flattened this, and I've kept it as a sweep, is just because if for our final render we kind of want to mess with it and we want to maybe make it curve to this side. It still has the ability to be edited, and I typically try to keep sweeps editable until I like, absolutely need to flatten them down. So, oh, I accidentally deleted the wrong material here. I need to put the base material back on there. There we go. And for these legs here, I think I'm going to apply the same thing. There's no top to our legs, so we won't even end up getting any of that dust on there. So that should work just fine. And I'll apply that rubber material also to the resting pad, which is kind of this piece that I have underneath here. This little flat piece here. And that's cubic. I'm actually going to bring that way up and scale, or, oh, wrong way. We'll put 500. Bring that way up in scale, because it's, yeah, that repeats a lot better for what I want. Alright, and I think we are good to go with materials. And because I've been having a hard time doing the rendering with my recording software, I'm probably actually just going to render this but on the side, and then I can kind of talk about what I did in the rendering process and show you the final product that I came up with. But I'm not going to be able to do the rendering at the same time, just because I keep getting crashes. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my scene, and then I'll explain what I've done with the scene. Alright, so here's the final render. And this could definitely be pushed a lot further, but for my time constraint, this is as far as I'm going to take it. And basically, it's a pretty simple setup. I have a fill light in here. So I'm basically getting this top light up here, which is sort of filling in all the cracks and corners of my model, just kind of giving it an overarching light. And it's a pretty subtle light. It's not super strong. It's only at 6 on the power. And then I have a rim light, which is this light way over here to the right. And it's a pretty strong light, but it's just giving it a little bit of that like edge that you see right on the keys to give you a little more highlight in the render. And I had a directional light that I was using to get some shadows. You can see it was, yeah, there it is right there. But it was just kind of too strong, so I actually ended up getting rid of that. And then I'm using a Octane Sky with an HDRI image texture in there. And it's a pretty simple image texture. It's just giving me some lighting and just kind of filling out my whole scene and making it feel more natural. So that's basically all I did for the lighting. I threw a camera in there, an Octane camera, and I just turned on the post-processing to give myself just a little bit of bloom, because the bloom always makes everything look a little nicer, in my opinion. Some people hate it. Yeah, and other than that, we're just getting the glow from underneath. I applied my Illuminant material that I'm actually using for the keys just on the base part of these keys, and then I created my rubber material, which I actually came in and made some changes on that. And for the base, I made a couple changes because I had actually made a mistake to it earlier. And I can actually go into that material and kind of see what's going on there. So with this material, I actually had to change the way that I was doing my Falloff Map for the dust. So we had our dust coming in here, and I actually had to switch these values around because I was getting dust on the entire thing, and I wanted it to only be applied to the top. So I had actually messed that up before, and I changed the minimum value to 0 and the maximum value to 1, giving me the dust that I was looking for, that sort of soft dusting. Yeah, and I had applied that to the top of those. And I kind of messed around with my values in here to get a little bit more chipping in the bump. But for the most part, I kept all of this the same. I think I brought this texture projection up to 2 for my fingerprint overlay, so that it was a little bit bigger on the base, and it just made it feel a little better for the size that we have going on here. For the ground, I have just my ground and I put a simple Octane material that's glossy with a roughness of 0.12, just to get a little bit of that reflection, but not too strong that it feels cheesy and fake. And I put it on path tracing and got some renders. So this is about as far as I'm going to push this. We could definitely go in here and do some more work to it. I think I could add some more dust in there. We definitely put some subtle dust in there, but it could really use some more to get that more lifelike feel. And we could really also make this a more used keyboard, make it really feel like it's been worn. But for this application, I think that we're looking pretty good. And it might honestly be fun. You can see I tried to put a volume in there, thinking that that might give me some cool looks, but I was gonna have to mess with that a little more and didn't really want to put the time in for that. So I hope that this is helpful and that you might be able to create some of your own stuff, do some of your own renders, and I think I'll dive deeper into renders in the future and the actual process of setting up my scene. But for now, I think that this is what we're gonna go with. So thanks for watching, and I am hoping that I will be able to post a video next week, and I'll come up with another topic. So I will see you all next week.